Margaret Sullivan died on a cold Thursday morning in February, and by the time her children stood in the lawyer's office 6 weeks later, two of them had already stopped speaking to each other. The reading of the will was supposed to be a formality. Everyone knew what their mother had promised. They'd heard it for years, some of them for decades. But when Thomas Griggs, the estate attorney, began reading the document dated 18 months before Margaret's death, the air in that small conference room changed. Claire, the eldest daughter, went pale. Daniel, the middle child, leaned forward with his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles turned white, and Rebecca, the youngest, simply stared at the mahogany table as if she'd already known this was coming. What Margaret had promised and what Margaret had written were not the same thing. Not even close. This is the story of how a family fell apart, not because someone died, but because someone decided, in the final chapter of their life, to rewrite everything they'd ever said out loud. It's about the distance between a mother's word and a mother's signature, and about the fact that in the eyes of the law, only one of those things has any power at all. Let's go back to the beginning. Margaret Sullivan was 73 when she died of congestive heart failure at Mercy General Hospital in Portland, Oregon. She'd been a widow for 11 years. Her husband, Robert Sullivan, had passed away in 2013 after a brief illness, leaving her the house, a modest investment portfolio, a life insurance payout, and the family hardware store that had been in the Sullivan name since 1960. Margaret had 3 children. Claire was 51, a high school English teacher living in Eugene with her husband and 2 teenage sons. Daniel was 48, divorced, working in sales for a pharmaceutical company and living just outside Portland. Rebecca was 43, unmarried, a freelance graphic designer who had moved back into the family home 7 years earlier to help care for their mother. On the surface, it was an ordinary family, middle class, functional, the kind of family that gathered for Thanksgiving and texted in a group chat about birthdays and recipes. But like most families, the Sullivan children had their own private maps of resentment, favoritism, and old wounds that had never quite healed. Claire had always been the responsible one. The eldest, the one who called every Sunday, remembered anniversaries, organized the holiday dinners. She'd put herself through college, married a decent man, raised good kids. She'd done everything right in the way that oldest children often do, and she carried a quiet, unspoken belief that her mother noticed, that it mattered. Daniel had struggled, 2 failed businesses, a marriage that ended badly, a drinking problem he'd mostly gotten under control by his He was charming and unreliable in equal measure, the kind of man who'd borrow $200 and pay you back 6 months later with an apology and a bottle of wine. Margaret had bailed him out more than once. He knew it. Everyone knew it. Rebecca was the baby, the artist, the one who'd never quite launched. She'd lived in Seattle for a while, then San Francisco, then back to Portland, drifting between freelance gigs and unpaid creative projects. When Margaret's health began to decline in 2017, Rebecca had been the one to move home. She'd been there ever since, sleeping in her childhood bedroom, cooking dinners, driving her mother to appointments, managing medications. Margaret had always said the same thing, for as long as any of them could remember. When I'm gone, you'll split everything evenly. 3 ways. That's only fair. She said it at Christmas dinners. She said it during arguments. She said it when Daniel asked to borrow money and when Claire suggested selling the hardware store. She said it so many times that it became a kind of mantra, a promise that held the fragile piece of the family together. The house in Northeast Portland was worth approximately $470,000. The hardware store, though struggling in recent years, was valued at around $350,000. The investment accounts and savings totaled another $220,000. Altogether, Margaret's estate was worth just over $1 million before taxes and fees. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to change lives. Enough to pay off Claire's mortgage. Enough to give Daniel a second chance. Enough to let Rebecca finally afford a place of her own. Enough to fight over. In the months before Margaret's death, there had been signs that something was different. Small things. Rebecca mentioned that their mother had been meeting with a lawyer. Daniel noticed that Margaret seemed anxious whenever the subject of the will came up. Claire tried to bring it up directly one Sunday afternoon in January, just weeks before Margaret died, and her mother had waved her off. "It's all taken care of," Margaret had said. "Don't worry about it." But Claire did worry. She'd always worried. It was her nature. The funeral was held on a grey Saturday in late February at St. Cecilia's Catholic Church. It was well attended. Margaret had been active in the parish, and the hardware store had been a neighborhood fixture for decades. People told stories. They cried. The 3 Sullivan children sat in the front pew, Rebecca between her older siblings, and they held hands. During the final hymn, it felt, for that one day, like they were united. The lawyer's letter arrived the following Tuesday. Thomas Griggs of Griggs and Howell requested the presence of Claire Sullivan Porter, Daniel Sullivan, and Rebecca Sullivan at his office on March 24th at 2 o'clock in the afternoon for the reading of Margaret Dunn, Last Will and Testament. Hey. 6 weeks of waiting. 6 weeks of assumptions. Claire assumed it would be straightforward. A third each. Clean, simple, fair. Daniel assumed the same, though he privately hoped there might be a little extra for him, given how much their mother had helped him over the years. Maybe she'd forgiven an old debt. Maybe she'd left him the truck. Rebecca didn't say much about what she assumed. She'd been quiet since the funeral, spending long hours alone in the house, going through her mother's things. When Claire asked if she was all right, Rebecca just nodded and said she was fine. Because Margaret Sullivan had made a decision in the last year and a half of her life, a decision she'd never spoken out loud to any of her children, and that decision was about to rewrite everything they believed about their family. If you've ever watched a family slowly realize they don't know each other as well as they thought, you'll want to hear how this plays out. Subscribing means you won't miss what happens next. The law office of Griggs and Howell was located in a modest 2-story building on Hawthorne Boulevard. The conference room was small and plain, with a rectangular table, 6 chairs, and a window overlooking a parking lot. Thomas Griggs was in his early 60s, gray-haired and professional, the kind of lawyer who'd spent decades delivering news that people didn't want to hear. Claire arrived first, 10 minutes early, wearing a black blazer and carrying a notebook. Daniel arrived exactly on time, smelling faintly of cologne and coffee. Rebecca was 5 minutes late, her hair pulled back, her face unreadable. They sat. Griggs opened a folder. "Thank you all for coming," he said. "I know this is a difficult time. I'll try to be as clear as possible." He began with the formalities. The will had been executed on September 14th, 2022, approximately 18 months before Margaret's death. It had been witnessed, notarized, and filed properly. There were no procedural issues. It was, in every legal sense, valid and binding. Your mother made some specific decisions regarding the distribution of her estate, Griggs said. I'm going to read the relevant sections now. Claire opened her notebook. Daniel leaned back in his chair. Rebecca stared at the table. Griggs began to read. The house on Northeast 47th Avenue, along with all furnishings and personal property contained therein, was left entirely to Rebecca Ann Sullivan. Claire's pen stopped moving. The Sullivan hardware store, including all assets, inventory, and business accounts, was left entirely to Rebecca Ann Sullivan. Daniel sat forward. The investment portfolio held at Merrill Lynch, totaling approximately $218,000, was to be divided as follows: $25,000 to Claire, $25,000 to Daniel Robert Sullivan, and the remainder to Rebecca Ann Sullivan. Claire looked up sharply. "What?" Griggs continued reading, his voice steady and professional, but the numbers were already clear. Rebecca was receiving the house. And the vast majority of the liquid assets. When everything was calculated, Rebecca's inheritance totaled approximately $900,000. Claire and Daniel were each receiving $25,000. The silence that followed was suffocating. Claire spoke first. Her voice was tight, controlled, the voice of someone trying very hard not to scream. "There's been a mistake." Griggs shook his head gently. "I assure you, there's no mistake. This document was prepared carefully and reviewed multiple times with your mother." "That's impossible," Claire said. "My mother told us, for years, that we'd split everything equally. She said it 100 times. "I understand that's what you believed," Griggs said, "but the will is clear." Daniel was staring at Rebecca. "Did you know about this?" Rebecca didn't look at him. "I didn't write the will." "That's not what I asked." "Mr. Sullivan," Griggs interjected, "your sister is not obligated to answer the question." "Rebecca." Daniel's voice was louder now, sharper. "Did you know?" Rebecca finally met his eyes. "She told me she was changing it. She didn't tell me the details." "When?" "Last year, around July." "And you didn't think to mention that to us?" Claire's voice was shaking now. "You didn't think we deserved to know?" "It wasn't my decision to make," Rebecca said quietly. "Bullshit." Daniel stood up. "You were living with her. You were in her ear. Every single day. You manipulated her." "I took care of her," Rebecca said, and for the first time, there was heat in her voice. "Where were you, Daniel? Where were you when she couldn't get out of bed, when she needed help at 3 in the morning? I was there every day for 7 years." "So this is payment?" Claire asked. "For caregiving?" "That's what this is." "I don't know what it is," Rebecca said. "I didn't ask for it, but you didn't refuse it either," Daniel said. Griggs raised a hand. "I think we should take a moment. I want to contest this," Claire said. "We're contesting the Will Greek side." "You have that, right? But I should inform you that your mother was of sound mind when this will was executed. I met with her personally. She was lucid, clear, and decisive. She understood exactly what she was doing." "Then why?" Claire's voice broke. "Why would she do this?" Griggs hesitated. "She left letters, one for each of you." He reached into the folder and pulled out 3 envelopes. Each one had a name written in Margaret's careful handwriting. Claire, Daniel, Rebecca. He slid them across the table. None of them moved. "I'll give you some privacy," Griggs said, and he left the room. For a long moment, no one touched the letters. They sat on the table like small white accusations. Finally, Claire picked hers up. Her hands were shaking. She opened it carefully, unfolding the single sheet of paper inside. Daniel did the same. Rebecca held hers but didn't open it right away. Claire read it in silence. Her face went through a series of expressions: confusion, hurt, something close to rage. When she finished, she set the letter down and looked at Rebecca. She says, "You earned it." Daniel was still reading his. When he finished, he crumpled the letter in his fist. Mine says, "I've already taken enough from her over the years." His voice was bitter. "She's not wrong, but Jesus Christ, Mom." Claire's letter had been longer. In it, Margaret explained that Claire had built a good life, a stable life, and didn't need the inheritance the way Rebecca did. That Claire had always been strong, always been fine, and that she trusted her eldest daughter to understand. But Claire didn't understand. "This isn't about need," Claire said. "This is about fairness, about what she promised." "She didn't promise anything legally binding," Rebecca said quietly. "Don't." Claire pointed a finger across the table. "Don't you dare hide behind legal language. This is about family, about trust. And I didn't break it," Rebecca said. "She made her own choice. After you spent 7 years whispering in her ear, I was taking care of her. You were securing your future." Rebecca stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. "I'm not doing this." "You don't get to walk away," Daniel said. "Watch me." She left the room, still holding the unopened letter. Claire and Daniel sat in silence. Outside, the sound of traffic. Inside, the ruin of everything they'd believed. "We have to fight this," Claire said finally. Daniel nodded. "Yeah, we do." But even as they said it, they both knew the truth. In the eyes of the law, it didn't matter what Margaret had promised. It only mattered what she'd signed. The days after the will reading were strange and tense. Rebecca remained at the house on Northeast 47th, which was now legally hers, though the estate wouldn't be fully settled for months. Claire and Daniel communicated only through terse text messages, coordinating their next steps. Both of them hired lawyers. Both of them began the process of contesting the will. Their argument was simple. Andway, influency. Rebecca had been living with Margaret, caring for her, and in a position to manipulate a vulnerable elderly woman into changing her will. It was a common legal challenge in inheritance disputes, and under the right circumstances, it could work. But the circumstances had to be right. Claire's attorney was a sharp woman in her 40s, named Denise Hoffman, who specialized in estate litigation. She listened carefully to Claire's story, took notes, and then asked a series of uncomfortable questions. Had Margaret been diagnosed with dementia or any cognitive impairment? No. Had there been any medical documentation of confusion or incompetence? No. Had Margaret expressed, in writing or in the presence of witnesses, that she felt pressured or coerced by Rebecca? No. Hoffman leaned back in her chair. Then this is going to be difficult. But it's not fair, Claire said. She promised us. Fairness and legality are not the same thing, Hoffman said gently. People change their wills all the time. They're allowed to, even if it contradicts what they said years earlier. So we have no case. I didn't say that, but you need to understand what you're up against. We'd have to prove that Rebecca exerted undue influence, that your mother was in a weakened state, and that the will reflects Rebecca's desires, not your mother's. That's a high bar. We'll meet it, Claire said, but she didn't sound convinced. Daniel's lawyer was less optimistic, a solo practitioner named Jean Bartlett, who worked out of a cramped office near the courthouse. He told Daniel bluntly that contesting the will was expensive. time-consuming, and unlikely to succeed. Your best bet is to negotiate, Bartlett sighed. See if Rebecca will agree to a settlement. Maybe she'll split things more evenly to avoid a court fight. And if she won't, Bartlett shrugged. Then you lose your $25,000 on legal fees and still don't get anything else. Daniel stared at him. That's it. That's inheritance. Look, it's brutal. Meanwhile, Rebecca hired her own attorney, a calm and methodical man named Lawrence Shen, who advised her to stay quiet, stay out of contact with her siblings, and let the process play out. The will was solid. The documentation was clear. As long as Rebecca didn't do anything foolish, she'd be fine. But Rebecca didn't feel fine. She'd opened her mother's letter the night after the will reading, alone in the house that now belonged to her. The letter was 3 pages long, written in Margaret's shaky handwriting. It began with an apology. Margaret knew this would hurt Claire and Daniel. She knew they'd feel betrayed, but she'd made the decision because, in her final years, she'd come to understand something about her children that she hadn't fully grasped before. Claire didn't need the money. She had a stable marriage, a good job, a house that was nearly paid off. She'd be fine. Daniel had already taken so much over the years. Loans that were never repaid. Money for the business ventures that failed. Bail for the DUI. Margaret loved him, but she couldn't keep enabling him. The $25,000 was more than he'd earned, and she hoped he'd use it wisely. Rebecca, though. Rebecca had given up her life to care for her mother. She'd put her career on hold. She'd sacrificed relationships, opportunities, her independence. She'd been there every single day, uncomplaining and steady. And Margaret had watched her daughter's youth slip away in that house. In those rooms, changing bedpans and refilling prescriptions and pretending it was fine. It wasn't fine. Margaret wanted Rebecca to have a life. A real one. The inheritance was her way of saying thank you. And also, I'm sorry. Rebecca read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and put it back in the envelope. She didn't feel grateful. She felt tired. April turned into May. The legal process ground forward slowly. Depositions were scheduled, medical records were subpoenaed. Witnesses were interviewed. Claire and Daniel's lawyers built their case around a series of small pieces of evidence. There was a neighbor who'd noticed Rebecca answering the phone for Margaret more often in the final year. There was a former caregiver who'd been let go 6 months before Margaret died, after Rebecca took over most of the daily care responsibilities. There was a distant cousin who claimed Margaret had mentioned feeling guilty about burdening Rebecca. It wasn't much, but it was something. Rebecca's lawyer countered with Margaret's medical records, which showed no signs of cognitive decline, with testimony from Dr. Patel, Margaret's primary physician, who confirmed that she'd been sharp and clear-minded until the very end, with the testimony of Thomas Griggs himself, who described his meetings with Margaret as entirely professional and free of any outside pressure. In late May, Claire discovered something. She'd been going through old family photos, looking for anything that might help the case, when she found a box of documents in the back of her own closet. Papers from her father's estate, old tax returns, and near the bottom, a folder labeled Robert's instructions. Inside was a letter her father had written years before his death, addressed to Margaret. In it, Robert laid out his wishes for how the estate should be handled after both he and Margaret were gone. He'd been specific. The house should be sold, and the proceeds divided equally among the 3 children. The hardware store should be sold as well, unless one of the children wanted to take it over, in which case they should buy out the others at fair market value. Everything else, equal shares. Robert had signed it. Margaret had not. It wasn't a legal document. It wasn't binding, but it was proof that, at one point, the plan had been exactly what Claire and Daniel believed. Equal, shares. Claire brought the letter to Denise Hoffman, who read it carefully and then shook her head. This was your father's wish, not your mother's. But she would have agreed with him, Claire insisted. They always made decisions together. Did she ever sign anything confirming that? No. Then it doesn't matter. Claire felt something crack inside her. So nothing matters. Nothing we were told. Nothing we believed. Hoffman's expression soft. I know this is hard, but the state law is very clear. A person's final will is the only document that counts. Everything else is just conversation. Claire left the office in a daze. She sat in her car in the parking lot for 20 minutes, staring at the letter her father had written, and she cried for the first time since the funeral. Not because her mother had died, but because her mother had lied. In early June, Daniel did something reckless. He showed up at the house on Northeast 47th unannounced, rang the doorbell, and when Rebecca answered, he pushed past her into the entryway. We need to talk. Rebecca stepped back. You can't be here. My lawyer said. I don't care what your lawyer said. Daniel's voice was ragged. This is destroying the family. You know that. Right. This is tearing us apart. I didn't do this, Rebecca said. Mom did. And you let her. What was I supposed to do? Tell her no. Yes. Daniel's voice cracked. You were supposed to tell her it wasn't fair. You were supposed to say no. Rebecca stared at him. I took care of her, Daniel, for 7 years. Where were you? I was trying to keep my life together, and I gave up mine. They stood in the hallway, two siblings who'd once been close, now facing each other like strangers. I don't want to fight you, Daniel said quietly. I just want what's fair. Fair according to who? Rebecca asked. You, Claire? Or the woman who actually wrote the will? Daniel had no answer to that. He left without another word. Rebecca locked the door behind him and leaned against it, her heart pounding. She pulled out her phone and called her lawyer. He was just here, she said, at the house. Loren Shan's voice was calm. Did he threaten you? No. But did he damage anything? No. Then let it go. He's desperate. Desperate people do stupid things. Don't engage. Rebecca hung up and walked through the house that was now hers, and felt absolutely no joy in it. The deeper anyone looked into Margaret Sullivan's final years, the more complicated the picture became. In July, Claire's lawyer uncovered something unexpected. A series of emails between Margaret and a financial advisor named Karen Wu, dated between June and August of 2022, just a few months before Margaret changed her will. In the emails, Margaret asked detailed questions about structuring an inheritance to minimize taxes and ensure that one specific beneficiary, unnamed in the emails, would receive the maximum benefit. She asked about trusts, about transfer on death accounts, about whether it was better to leave real estate or liquid assets. Karen Wu had responded professionally, outlining options. But in one email, she'd written something revealing. If your goal is to provide security for the child who's been caring for you, the structure you're describing makes sense. But you should know that your other children may feel blindsided if they're not aware of these plans. Margaret had replied, I'll handle that when the time comes. But she never had. When confronted with the emails during a deposition, Karen Wu confirmed that Margaret had been clear about her intentions. She wanted Rebecca to be financially secure. She wanted the house to stay in the family, not be sold. She wanted the hardware store to have a chance to continue. And Rebecca was the only one who'd expressed any interest in keeping it. Did Mrs. Sullivan seem pressured or confused during your conversations? Denise Hoffman asked. Not at all, Karen Wu said. She was very determined. She said she'd thought about it for a long time. Did she mention her other children? Yes, She said she loved them, but that they'd be fine without the inheritance. She seemed certain of that. The emails were damaging to Claire and Daniel's case. They showed premeditation. They showed that Margaret had consulted a professional and made informed decisions. They showed that this wasn't a hasty choice made under Rebecca's influence. It was something Margaret had planned. When Claire read the deposition transcript, she felt sick. Her mother had consulted a financial advisor. She'd researched the options. She'd known exactly what she was doing. And she'd done it anyway. By August, the legal battle had cost Claire nearly $15,000, and Daniel almost 12. They were burning through their modest inheritance, fighting for an inheritance they were increasingly unlikely to receive. Denise Hoffman sat Claire down for what she called a reality check. "We're not winning this," she said bluntly. "The evidence shows your mother made a clear, informed decision. There's no proof of undue influence, no proof of incompetence, no proof of coercion. But she promised," Claire said, her voice hollow. "Promises aren't contracts." "Then what do we do?" "You have two options. You can continue fighting and probably lose, or you can try to negotiate a settlement with Rebecca. She won't settle." "Have you asked?" Claire hadn't. She hadn't spoken to Rebecca since March. That night, she sent a text message. "Can we talk?" Rebecca didn't respond for 2 days. When she finally did, her message was short. "About what?" Claire called her. Rebecca didn't answer. Claire tried again the next day. Again, no answer. Finally, Claire drove to the house on Northeast 47th and knocked on the door. Rebecca answered, but she didn't invite Claire inside. "What do you want?" "I want to talk," Claire said. "Without lawyers, just us." Rebecca hesitated, then stepped aside. "Fine." They sat in the living room, the same living room where they'd spent countless Christmases and Thanksgivings, and the air between them was cold. "I'm running out of money," Claire said. "Fighting this is destroying me financially." "Then stop fighting." "I can't. Not when it's this unfair." Rebecca's jaw tightened. "You want to talk about fair? Let's talk about the 7 years I spent in this house. Let's talk about how you visited once a month and Daniel showed up twice a year. Let's talk about who actually took care of Mom." "We had our own lives." "So did I," Rebecca said, her voice rising. "I had a career. I had friends. I had a relationship that ended because I moved back here. I gave up everything. And Mom paid you for it. She gave me an inheritance. That's not the same thing as payment." Claire leaned forward. "Then why not share it? Why not do what she always said she'd do? Split it 3 ways." "Because that's not what she wanted," Rebecca said. "Not at the end." "Why? What changed?" Rebecca was quiet for a long moment. "Tensei Syed, you really want to know?" "Yes." Rebecca stood and walked to a desk in the corner. She opened a drawer and pulled out a small notebook, the kind with a marbled cover, about the size of a paperback book. She handed it to Claire. "This was Mom's," Rebecca said. "She kept it during the last 2 years. I found it after she died." Claire opened the notebook carefully. The pages were filled with Margaret's handwriting, entries dated sporadically, some just a few lines, others a full page. She began to read. The notebook was part diary, part reflection. Margaret had written about her health, her fears, her gratitude for Rebecca's care. But she'd also written about Claire and Daniel in ways that were painfully honest. One entry from April of 2022. "Claire called today. She talked for 30 minutes about her son's college applications. She didn't ask how I was feeling. I don't think she even noticed I could barely catch my breath." Another from June. "Daniel asked to borrow $3,000 for a business opportunity. I said no for the first time in my life. He was angry. He said I was being selfish. Maybe I am, but I'm tired of being an ATM. And then, from July, an entry that made Claire's hands shake. I've been thinking about the will. I always said I'd divide everything equally. But is that really fair? Fair to who? Claire has everything she needs. Daniel will waste whatever I give him. Rebecca has given up so much for me. Maybe fairness isn't about equal shares. Maybe it's about giving people what they actually need. Claire read through the entire notebook. There were dozens of entries, some loving, some frustrated, all heartbreakingly real. In one entry, Margaret wrote about feeling invisible to her older children, about how their phone calls felt perfunctory and obligatory. In another, she wrote about watching Rebecca fold laundry late at night, looking exhausted and sad, and feeling a crushing guilt. The final entry was dated 3 weeks before Margaret died. I've made my decision. I know Claire and Danielle will be hurt, but I can't undo what I've done to Rebecca by asking her to sacrifice even more. This is the only way I can give her back some of what she lost. When Claire finished reading, she set the notebook down carefully. She didn't tell you any of this. Rebecca shook her head. I found it a month after she died. I almost threw it away. Why didn't you? Because it's the truth, even if it hurts. Claire sat back, her mind reeling. Everything she'd believed about her relationship with her mother was being rewritten. She'd thought they were close. She'd thought the Sunday phone calls and the holiday visits were enough. They hadn't been. I didn't know she felt that way, Claire said quietly. Neither did I. Rebecca said, not until I read it. They sat in silence. Finally, Claire asked, are you going to keep everything? Rebecca looked at her. I don't know yet. The estate's not even settled. But if it was up to you, Rebecca thought about it. I think I'd keep the house, and probably the store. But the money... She hesitated. I don't need all of it. I never said I did. So you'd split it. Maybe. If you stopped trying to take the whole thing away from me. Claire felt something shift. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But a crack in the wall. I'll talk to my lawyer, she said, about dropping the contest. Rebecca nodded. I'll talk to mine about a settlement. Claire stood to leave. At the door, she turned back. I'm sorry I wasn't here more. Rebecca's expression softened. Who slightly. I'm sorry she didn't tell you. It took another 3 months to finalize the settlement. In the end, Claire and Daniel each received $75,000 instead of $25,000. Rebecca kept the house and the hardware store, which she quietly began managing with the help of the longtime store manager who'd worked for Robert decades earlier. The total wasn't equal. It would never be equal. But it was something both sides could live with. Daniel used his $75,000 to pay off debt and start a small consulting business. It wasn't much, but it was stable, and for the first time in years, he wasn't borrowing money. Claire put hers toward her son's college funds. She didn't feel entirely at peace with the outcome, but she'd stopped feeling angry. Mostly, she just felt sad. Sad that her mother hadn't felt able to say these things out loud. Sad that it had taken a legal battle to force everyone to be honest. Rebecca stayed in the house. She renovated the upstairs, turning her old bedroom into an office where she could work on her design projects. She spent weekends at the hardware store, learning the business from the inside. And slowly, carefully, she began to build something that felt like her own life. She never opened the letter her mother had left her during the will reading. She didn't need to. The notebook had said everything. On a cold afternoon in December, almost a year after Margaret's death, the three Sullivan siblings met for coffee. It was Claire's idea. She'd suggested it over text, carefully, not sure if Rebecca would even respond. But she had. They met at a place on Hawthorne, neutral territory, and sat in a booth near the window. The conversation was awkward at first, filled with long pauses and safe topics. The weather, work, the holidays coming up. But eventually, Daniel asked the question all of them had been thinking. Do you think she knew this would happen? That we'd fight? Rebecca considered it. I think she knew it was a possibility. And she did it anyway, Claire said. Yeah. Yeah. Why? Rebecca shrugged. Maybe she thought it was worth it. Maybe she thought it would force us to actually talk to each other for once. Daniel laughed bitterly. Well, it worked. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Claire said, I've been thinking about what she wrote in the notebook. About me. She loved you, Rebecca said. C'est juste. Wished things were different. So do I. Claire looked at her younger sister, really looked at her, and saw someone she hadn't fully understood before. Someone who'd carried a weight that Claire had never noticed. I'm sorry I didn't see it, Claire said. How hard it was for you. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. I'm sorry it had to come to this. Daniel reached across the table and took both his sister's hands. Maybe we can do better, he said. Going forward, it wasn't a promise. It was okay. And maybe, in the end, there was Saleni Upamad. Inheritance doesn't reward loyalty. It doesn't reward love or sacrifice or decades of phone calls and holiday visits. It rewards whoever's name is written in the will, signed and notarized and filed with the county clerk. Margaret Sullivan knew that when she made her decision, she knew her children would feel betrayed. She knew they'd fight, but she also knew something they didn't. That a promise is just words, and words, no matter how many times you repeat them, don't hold up in court. Margaret had promised them equal shares for years. She'd said it so often it became truth, but in the end, she'd decided that equal wasn't the same as fair. Rebecca had given up 7 years. Claire had built a stable life. Daniel had already taken more than his share. So Margaret rewrote the ending. Not the ending her children expected, the ending she believed they needed. Whether she was right is a question the Sullivan family will probably never agree on. Claire still feels the sting of betrayal. Daniel still struggles with the idea that his mistakes cost him hundreds of thousands of dollars. Rebecca still carries the guilt of receiving what her siblings believe she didn't earn. But they're talking now, slowly, carefully. And maybe that's what Margaret wanted all along. Not peace, but honesty. The kind of honesty that only comes when everything you believed gets stripped away, and all that's left is the truth, written in legal documents, in a notebook full of thoughts your mother never said out loud. Margaret Sullivan died on a cold Thursday morning in February, but the inheritance didn't end with her death. It's still unfolding. In every phone call, in every unspoken resentment, in every small attempt at rebuilding. Because the thing about inheritance isn't just what you receive, it's what you do with it after. And that story is still being written.